them. I just need to like wherever it's better. Thank you. I'm good. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I'm counting and seeing that all the chairs are filled, which is another good thing. I trust you had a good lunch. We are prepared to continue, so State of Ohio may call your next witness.
Matthew White.
You raise your right hand for me, sir, please. You solemnly swear to testify the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do. Sir, if you would, state your name and spell your last name for the court reporter, please.
My name is Matthew White, W-H-I-T-E.
And Mr. White, where are you employed?
I'm employed at the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, or BCI, Forensic Laboratory in London, Ohio.
How long have you worked for the Bureau of Criminal Investigation?
I've been at BCI for a little over 9 years.
Did you work anywhere else prior to that?
Yes, sir, I did.
Where'd you work?
I worked at the West Virginia State Police Forensic Laboratory and also at the Hamilton County Coroner's Office, also as a firearm and tool mark examiner.
That was my next question. Your duties with BCI and your duties with those other agencies, what are they?
In total, a little over 16 years as a firearm and tool mark examiners, specifically currently work at BCI.
What are your primary duties within BCI?
My primary duties involve the examination of firearms to determine their operability, as well as looking at fired ammunition components, be it fired cartridge cases or fired bullets, in an attempt to determine whether or not they have been fired in or from a specific firearm.
What education and training have you had throughout your life that allows you to hold the positions that you've previously described?
My formal education, I have a bachelor's degree in biological sciences with a minor in chemistry and history. In regards to specialized training, I've completed a 2-year training program under the Section Senior Examiners. I completed a program with the ATF known as the National Firearm Examiner Academy. I visited and reviewed approximately 18 different firearm and ammunition manufacturers, seeing firsthand how firearms are assembled and produced. I'm a member of the Association of Firearm and Tool Mark Examiners and currently work cases on a full-time basis at the lab in London, Ohio.
And do you continue to update your training and education even though you've described all the education you've already had?
Yes, sir. Pending budget requirements or availability, we're encouraged to attend additional training as fit.
Have you testified before in the courts of Ohio as an expert in the area of firearms identification?
Yes, sir. I've testified over 80 times in the field of firearm and tool mark identification in the states of Ohio and West Virginia.
And has that testimony been accepted by the courts?
Yes, sir, it has.
Your Honor, I would offer Mr. White as an expert at this time.
Any
No
objection?
objection, Your Honor.
He will be so designated.
Mr. White, if you would, first of all, explain to these folks on the jury what the term semi-automatic means when we're dealing with firearms.
Semi-automatic refers to the ability of a firearm to fire one time for each single pull of the trigger. When the trigger is pulled, the firing pin or striker will contact the primer that ignites the cartridge, allows the burning of the gunpowder to expel the bullet out the barrel. Through that firing process, the pressure that's generated will cause the slide to move rearward that extracts the fired cartridge case. It's ejected outward, and as the slide moves forward again, loads the next cartridge ready to be fired.
You said the spent cartridge case is ejected. Is there a typical side or direction that those cases are ejected from?
Generally speaking, the ejection of a cartridge case will be to the right of a vertical orientation of the firearm, assuming the firearm is held in a vertical position. In the general direction, the fired cartridge case will be ejected to the right.
Now, when a bullet is fired from a firearm, a handgun, semi-automatic handgun. Are there any identifying characteristics imparted on that bullet as it travels down the barrel of that gun before exiting?
Yes, sir. During the manufacturing process, the interior of the barrel contains what is known as rifling. Rifling is composed of lands and grooves, ridges and valleys that are imparted into the barrel. As the bullet travels down the barrel, it will allow the bullet to spin. The rifling causes the bullet to spin, and that's what gives the bullet a stability in flight, much the same way a football spins in flight to give it stability. Those characteristics the rifling imparts onto the fired bullet and can be uniquely identified to the bullet back to the gun.
How is it that they can be uniquely identified?
The various characteristics during that manufacturing process that produces the rifling gets imparted onto the bullet as it's traveling down the barrel. And it's those unique characteristics that I look for when I perform a microscopic comparison of fired bullets to determine whether or not they have been fired from a particular firearm.
And do manufacturers make known to people in your profession what their lands and grooves and identifications are?
Yes, there are various resources available to determine the number of lands and grooves present in various firearms.
With respect to the cartridge case that's ejected from that firearm, are there identifying characteristics imparted on that case also?
Yes, sir. During the firing process, when the firing pin contacts the rear of the primer, that primer is what ignites the gunpowder inside the cartridge case. When the firing pin contacts that primer, it can leave a firing pin impression. As the gunpowder burns, that cartridge case will set back under great pressure against the rear portion of the slide. That's also known as the breech face. And through the various manufacturing processes, it can impart the characteristics on that breech face onto the head of that cartridge case. And there are various other areas of the firearm that can potentially mark the cartridge cases as well that can be identified to a specific firearm.
Again, are those markings that are imparted on that spent cartridge case unique to each gun?
Yes, sir, they are.
Now, if a person in your profession, if you have some spent bullets and cartridge cases recovered as part of a crime, and you have a known weapon that is brought to you by a police agency, are you able to test the recovered bullets and cartridge cases against the known bullets and cartridge cases from that known gun?
Yes, sir, I am.
How do you do that?
I first take the submitted firearm and I will test fire it into a water recovery tank. It's that tank, the water slows the bullets down and allows me to capture known test fired bullets from that firearm. Also collect the fired cartridge cases that I took with that firearm. I then compare them microscopically, the known test fired bullets and known test fired cartridge cases, to the submitted evidence cartridge cases and bullets. And I look for unique characteristics that the firearm imparted onto them to say whether or not they had been fired in or from a particular firearm.
With respect to the bullets, describe to these folks what you're looking for when you put them under that comparison microscope.
When I look at a fired bullet, I will look at the general size of the bullet, the caliber, the diameter of the bullet. I will look at the number of lands and grooves for the bullet. The bullet can also spin either a right hand or left hand direction. I will look for the direction of twist, the type of rifling, and then I will look for unique characteristics as the bullet travels down that barrel, the unique characteristics that are imparted onto the bullet from that particular barrel in order to say whether or not it was fired from the submitted firearm.
And with respect to the cartridge cases, what are you looking for?
Through a similar process, I will typically look at the firing pin impression or the breech face characteristics of the fired cartridge cases that I took myself, the known test fires, and I will look at those characteristics compared to the evidence cartridge cases in an effort to determine if they were fired in a specific firearm.
And by that process, are you able to determine, to the exclusion of all other guns, if a bullet or a cartridge case was ejected from a certain firearm?
I can determine, yes, if it was fired in a particular firearm.
What does the term operability mean to a person in your profession?
Operability refers to the mechanical ability of the firearm to function. or to say whether or not the firearm is capable of firing a cartridge.
So it just means, will the gun work?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
When a firearm is discharged, other than the bullet exiting the end of the barrel of that gun, are there other items that leave the barrel with that bullet?
In addition to a bullet exiting the barrel of a firearm, you can also have partially burned gunpowder particles that can be expelled forward of the firearm as well.
Do those residues travel various distances?
Yes, as the gunpowder exits the end of the barrel, it will typically get larger as the distance increases as it moves away from the barrel. This gunpowder can potentially be deposited on articles of clothing or garments. Should a pattern of residue be found, a gun firearm and ammunition can be test fired at various distances in an effort to determine an approximate distance they have been fired from.
And is there a term for that approximate distance of determining how far a barrel is to certain items?
Yes, we refer to that as a muzzle to target determination.
What does the term hollow point bullets mean?
Hollow point, or a jacketed hollow point, refers to the style of a particular bullet. Typically, the end of the bullet will have a hollow cavity in it, and a hollow point is designed to expand when it comes into contact with something.
When you say expand, you mean kind of mushroom out?
Yes, the hollow cavity of the end of the bullet, when it comes into contact with something, will allow the bullet to mushroom and expand to become a larger diameter.
And finally, the term jacketed hollow point or jacketed bullet, what does that mean?
Jacketed hollow point refers to typically a fire bullet or a bullet has a copper jacket with a lead inner core present. So when I refer to a jacketed hollow point, that means it had a copper jacket with a lead core. The bullet also had a hollow cavity, meaning that it was designed to expand.
Now, with respect to someone in your profession, the core part of the bullet doesn't get anything imparted on it when it travels down the barrel. Is that correct?
That's correct. The core of the bullet, or that's the lead portion, is surrounded by the copper jacket. As the bullet travels down the barrel, only the copper jacket comes into contact with the rifling. The lead is inside the copper, so therefore there are no visible characteristics on the interior lead core.
In this case, Mr. White, did you receive certain items of evidence and were you asked to perform certain tests upon them?
Yes, sir, I was.
Now, when your facility receives evidence from an agency, what procedure do you follow with regard to checking that evidence in and storage and those types of things?
When evidence is submitted to the laboratory, it's assigned a unique case identifier or a case number. Then each item of evidence is assigned a unique item number. That evidence is then placed into a secure storage location until such time as it can be worked. Following it being worked, it is then returned to a secure storage location until such time that it can be returned to the submitting agency.
So I wouldn't be able to walk into your secure facility and take out some guns and test them or do anything with them?
You would not.
I want to start out, Mr. White, by showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 14. You recognize that exhibit?
Firearm is unloaded and in a safe condition. Yes, sir, I do recognize these items.
Can you tell me what those items are?
These particular items, when I refer to the case being assigned the evidence a unique number, the purple sticker you'll see on the item of the evidence, that corresponds to the laboratory sticker that shows the unique case number as well as the unique laboratory number, our item number for the evidence. This particular item I can recognize as a Glock Model 26 pistol. I can recognize it by the Sharpie markings on the top of the slide that I put on there, as well as a magazine. Again, you'll notice the Sharpie markings on the side of it.
Now, Earlier, you discussed a semi-automatic handgun. This is a semi-automatic handgun, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And you talked about the slide, and that's this upper portion of the gun?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And then this magazine would be filled with bullets,
Yes, that's correct.
placed into the bottom here,
Yes.
shoved up, and in this case, you'd have to pull the slide back to load the gun, right?
Correct. The magazine will be inserted into the grip area of the firearm until it is locked into position. The slide will then be allowed to move forward. As the slide moves forward, it will take the cartridge that's loaded into the top of the magazine. It is then loaded into the rear portion of the barrel, and it'll be ready to fire.
You were asked to examine that firearm, and you also, and we'll talk about it a little bit, received some bullets and some cartridges, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Did you test that weapon for operability?
Yes, I did.
And again, explain to these folks how you did it.
In order to determine if the firearm was operable, I first visually examined the firearm to make note of its physical specifications. I then test fired the firearm, loading cartridges into the magazine, inserting the magazine into the firearm, and then test firing the firearm into our range facility to collect known test-fired cartridge cases and known test-fired bullets. And during that firing process, that allows me to show that the firearm is capable of firing and function correctly.
And do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty based upon your testing, your training, and your education as to whether that State's Exhibit 14 is an operable weapon?
Yes, sir. During my testing, I found that the submitted firearm was operable.
Now that weapon is in a slide lock back position, is that correct?
Correct. The slide is the top portion, and it is in a rearward fixed position.
And is that the position that that slide would assume if the gun were fired till empty?
Yes, if the magazine is inserted into the firearm into a locked position, the last cartridge case that is fired, the slide will lock to the rear position as it's in. As you can see, if I were to release the slide release, the slide wants to move forward again. And you will hear that click, the slide will lock into the rear position after firing the last shot.
When the gun is in that condition, can it be pulled?
When the slide is in the rearward position,
Yes, sir.
when the slide is in the rearward position, presumably that is from the firing process of the last cartridge in the magazine. The slide will lock back, and you'll see that the trigger is in the rearward position. So pulling the trigger, nothing would occur.
Thank you. You can set that down. I'm going to show you now what's been marked as State's Exhibit 6. And the bag that accompanies it, State's Exhibit 6A and 6B. Do you recognize those exhibits, sir?
Yes, I do. I can also recognize the laboratory label on the packaging.
Let's start out with, what is State's Exhibit 6?
State's Exhibit 6 is one quantity critical defense ammunition box containing various 9mm Luger cartridges. And when I use the term 9mm Luger, that refers to the size or the shape of a specific cartridge a firearm is designed to fire.
When that box was received by you at BCI, do you recall how many bullets were contained in it?
Inside the box, originally as submitted, it contained 21 9mm Luger cartridge cases.
Now, 6A and 6B, could you describe what those are for me?
Of the 21 submitted loaded cartridges, there were two different brands of ammunition present. States Exhibit 6A and 6B correspond to one cartridge of each brand that was physically disassembled, meaning I took the bullet out of the cartridge case to be able to examine the interior components of the cartridge, as well as to get a better examination of the bullets that were loaded within them.
And for our purposes, 6A, what type of ammunition is that?
States Exhibit 6A corresponds to a Hornady brand cartridge, and it would be a jacketed hollow point design, with Hornady being the manufacturer, or we might use the term head stamp on the end of a cartridge. Typically will be branded by the manufacturer and usually the design or the size of the cartridge. In this particular case, 9mm Luger.
6B is what?
6B corresponds to another particular cartridge that was submitted, and it had a Starline cartridge case. Starline refers to the head stamp, had a little asterisk with a star and another asterisk, and that's referred to as Starline. And that particular, one of those cartridges was disassembled also to examine the interior components.
And when you say I've just taken one of the full bullets out of States Exhibit 6, when you say disassembled, you're telling these folks that you took this top part off.
That's correct. The bullet was physically pulled out of the cartridge case, removed.
And then you have the bottom and you emptied the gunpowder and everything in here.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Did you receive or did you use some of the submitted items in States Exhibit 6 for testing purposes?
Yes, there were some of the cartridges that were used for test firing.
I'm going to show you now what's been marked as States Exhibit 8. Take a moment. Tell me what that is.
States Exhibit 8 corresponds to my envelope containing known test fires that I took with the submitted Hornady cartridge cases, or the Hornady ammunition in the submitted Glock pistol.
And does that envelope indicate for what purpose you took those test fires?
Yes, these particular items were used for distance determination, also referred to as a muzzle for target determination.
And States Exhibit 9?
States Exhibit 9 corresponds to an envelope containing additional test fires that I took with the submitted Glock pistol through some of the submitted cartridges.
And these you used for comparison purposes to the submitted known samples?
Yes, those particular cartridges were loaded in the submitted pistol. That pistol was fired in our range where I collected the fired bullets. I also collected the fired cartridge cases, and it's those particular items that I used for my microscopic comparison.
And I'm going to put something up here on this screen here. You talked about a hollow point flattening out or spreading out. Is that an example of what a hollow point bullet does when it strikes an object?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And when you talk about breech face marks imparted on a cartridge case, is that the end of the cartridge case you're talking about?
Yes, the head stamp refers to this outer area containing information about the manufacturer. This particular, the small indentation in the center of the cartridge, that's the firing pin impression, and the rest of the primer area, that is the breech face area, that during that firing process that sets back against the interior portion of the slide, that picks up those characteristics during that firing process.
Show what's been marked marked States Exhibit 4, and then 10 smaller envelopes marked States Exhibits 4A through J inclusive. If you would, could you take a moment just to look at those?
These particular items correspond to 10 fired 9mm Luger cartridge cases.
Those were the 10 fired 9mm Luger cartridge cases that were submitted to your office in this case?
Yes, sir, they were.
Did you have an opportunity, sir, to compare each of those 10 fired 9mm Luger cartridges to the known test-fired cartridges from States Exhibit 14?
Yes, sir, I did.
And again, explain to these folks how you do that.
The known test-fired cartridge cases that you previously saw, I then performed a microscopic comparison of those test-fired cartridge cases compared to the submitted unknown test-fired or unknown cartridge cases. I looked for microscopic characteristics that are unique to that particular firearm during the firing process, and I was able to conclude that the 10 fired 9mm Luger cartridge cases were fired in the submitted Glock pistol.
So all 10 of those in States Exhibits 4A through J were fired in States Exhibit 14.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And that's an opinion you hold to a reasonable degree of certainty based upon your training, your education, and your testing.
Yes, sir, it is.
This gun, States Exhibit 14, when I fire it from a standard shooting position like this, which way does the cartridge go?
Generally speaking, the fired cartridge cases will be ejected to the right-hand side of the firearm. On this particular firearm, the ejector, that's the portion of the firearm that when the slide moves rearward, contacts the fired cartridge case, causing the cartridge case to be ejected outward. It's located on the left side. When the cartridge case comes into contact with that ejector, it will be ejected in the general direction to the right-hand side of the firearm, assuming the firearm is held in a vertical position.
I wanted to show you now, show you what's been marked as States Exhibit 5. You recognize that exhibit, sir?
Yes, sir, I do.
Can you tell me what it is?
States Exhibit 5 corresponds to a small jacket fragment.
Now, did you have, first off, when you say a small jacket fragment, I've just taken another one of my bullets out of States Exhibit 6. You're talking about this copper jacketing around the lead core, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct. This is a portion of that jacket material. It's not an intact or a complete jacket. It's only a fragment.
Is it unusual to find fragments or pieces break off?
That's common to occur.
Did you have an opportunity to examine that fragment for the lands and grooves and the other characteristics that are imparted on a bullet to the known test fires in this case?
Yes, I did.
And were you able to reach any conclusion with regard to States Exhibit 5?
States Exhibit 5 corresponds to the fired bullet jacket fragment. There were no characteristics present for identification purposes.
And that's, a lot of that has to do with the size of the fragment?
The size of the fragment or the location of the fragment. The jacket material, when you talk about a jacketed hollow point, the bullet is the general shape it has a vertical wall, and then the forward portion of it is angled. Well, that angled portion does not come into contact with the rifling, only the side areas of the bullet. So depending on if the jacket material is from that top portion of the bullet, it wouldn't contain any characteristics that could be identified or compared.
First off, I want to show you the bag marked States Exhibit 7. You recognize that bag?
Yes, sir, I do.
And how do you recognize it?
I can identify it by the purple label that is applied to it with the case, the laboratory case number, as well as the unique item number that was placed on it. Yes.
Mr. White, I have just placed before you 10 plastic tubes labeled States Exhibit 7A through J. Do you recognize those exhibits?
Yes, sir, I do.
Can you tell me what's contained within those exhibits?
I can identify these particular plastic vials. There are 10 vials containing multiple fire bullets, fire bullet jackets, and other jacket fragments. I can also identify the case number and item number of my initial placed onto each of the vials as well.
Did you have an opportunity to examine and compare those bullets to the test-fired bullets that you recovered when you fired States Exhibit 14?
Yes, sir, I did.
And again, how did you conduct that comparison?
I performed a visual examination of the fire bullets, the fire bullet fragments. I looked at the unique characteristics present on them. I then performed a microscopic comparison of the known test-fired bullets that I took with the submitted firearm. And I looked microscopically for those unique characteristics as compared to the submitted fired bullets.
With respect to, and I'm going to take States Exhibit 7B as a boy out of that, with respect to the groupings that is left, can you tell these folks what that examination revealed?
I was able to conclude that the remaining items, the 8 fired bullets and 1 fired bullet jacket fragment, had similar class characteristics to the submitted Glock pistol. However, I was unable to identify or eliminate them as having been fired in the Glock pistol.
And when you use the term class characteristics, could you explain it to these folks, please?
Class characteristics are unique to a certain set of firearms, but not unique to one specific firearm. For example, the caliber of a firearm. A Glock Model 26 as a submitted firearm, there are several Glock Model 26s produced. In this particular case, 9mm Ruger, all of the Glock Model 26s would be that same caliber. The number of lanes and grooves in the barrel of a Glock Model 26, all of those models would have 6 lanes and grooves. The direction of twist would be the same. The type of rifling would be the same. However, the unique characteristics that the individual barrel puts upon it that allows me to say if it's fired or not, that's the characteristics that I have to look at in order to say that it's been fired. But I look at those class characteristics to see if they are the same first. And in this particular case, I was able to say that those class characteristics were the same: the caliber, number of lanes and grooves, direction of twist, the type of rifling. Those were all the same as was present on the test-fired bullets. However, there were just not enough unique characteristics to identify or eliminate present.
Showing you what's been returned to you now in States Exhibit 7B, did you also conduct a comparison with that?
Yes, sir, I did.
And can you tell us what your comparison revealed?
This particular item, as similar to the other bullets and fragments, had similar class characteristics to the test fires. There were not as many similar class characteristics. In this particular case, the caliber and the type of rifling was the same as the test-fired bullets. However, again, they lacked sufficient individual characteristics to say it was identified or excluded.
Is that in part because of damage caused to the bullets when they enter the body?
That could be one potential factor.
What are the other potential factors?
Damage that can occur to the firearm can certainly affect the characteristics that were imparted to it, and the particular firearm itself based on how well it tends to mark firearms.
So you can't say they were or weren't fired from States Exhibit 14?
That's correct. The class characteristics, there's general, the caliber, type of rifling, number of lands and grooves, those were the same as was present in the submitted Glock pistol. However, there were just not enough unique characteristics present to identify them, nor could I eliminate them as having been fired in the Glock pistol.
I want to give you back what's been marked as States Exhibit 6A. And I want you to look at I'm leaving before you, sir. States Exhibit 7A, E as in Edward, D as in dog, G, I, and J. And I've returned to you States Exhibit 6A, which you previously identified as the disassembled Hornady bullet. Is there a reason you disassembled that bullet?
Yes, I disassembled the Hornady cartridge to examine the bullet that was loaded into it, to compare to the fired bullets to see if the fired bullets were consistent with the Hornady brand cartridge.
And when you do something like that, what are you looking for?
When I look at the cartridge or the fired bullet compared to the submitted bullet, I look at the general shape of the bullet, its style, construction, and look for those similarities that are present on the fired items.
And as a result of that comparison, what conclusion did you come to?
I was able to say that the 6 fired bullet fragment were consistent with Hornady brand bullets.
With respect to States Exhibits 7D and J, which remain before you, there's a couple there's little red pieces of plastic inside of those vials, is that correct?
Yes, there are.
And is that something that you were looking for in comparison purposes?
Yes, these particular Hornady brand cartridges, the jacketed hollow point has a red polymer tip in the hollow point cavity on the bullets. That particular red polymer tip is consistent with the pieces of red polymer that are present in these items.
And when you're talking about red polymer, I'm putting another live bullet from States Exhibit 6 there. You're talking about that in the center of the bullet there?
Yes, sir, that's correct. This particular red polymer piece that is in the center of the hollow point cavity, that particular item is consistent with the red polymer pieces present.
Take these away from you. And I'm going to give you States Exhibit 6B back. Now I'm going to hand you States Exhibit 7C, 7B as in boy, 7F, and 7H. Again, can you tell me what States Exhibit 6B is, sir?
States Exhibit 6B corresponds to the other brand of cartridge that was submitted, the Starline head stamp cartridge. That particular bullet was disassembled in order to compare to the additional fire bullets or fire bullet fragments.
And did you have an occasion to, or were you able to compare those to those exhibits that I've left before you?
Yes, sir, I did.
And can you tell us what the results of that examination were?
I was able to conclude that the additional 4 items, the fire bullet jacket, was consistent with the bullet loaded into the Starline cartridges.
And were there any unique identifying marks on those star lines that assisted you in that identification?
Yes, the base of the bullet of the Starline had a X with a circle present that was indented onto the base of the bullet, and those were all present on those 4 fire bullets.
When you conducted your test on State's Exhibit 4A through J, which you've identified as the 10 cartridge cases, you had 6 Hornady cartridge cases and 4 Starline cases?
Yes, sir, that's correct. Of the 10 fired 9mm Luger cartridge cases, 6 had Hornady head stamps and 4 had Starline head stamps.
And with respect to your characteristics or your examination of the known bullets, you can't say that they were fired or they were not fired from State's Exhibit 14, is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
But with respect to these, we have 6 Hornady bullets, consistent with State's Exhibit 6A, the disassembled one.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And we have 4 Starline bullets, consistent with State's Exhibit 6B, the Starline one.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And all of those 10 bullets are 9mm.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And all 10 of those would have fit into one of those cartridges in State's Exhibits 4A through J.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Mr. White, I'm going to show you now what's been marked in a bag. It is marked State's Exhibit 10. You recognize this bag?
Yes, sir, I can recognize the bag. Again, you'll see the purple laboratory sticker corresponding to my item number.
Do you know what was contained or is contained within this bag?
It would have contained one long sleeve sweatshirt.
Were you asked to examine that sweatshirt?
Yes, sir, I was.
And what were you asked to examine that sweatshirt for?
I was asked to examine the sweatshirt to look for physical damage to the sweatshirt, as well as the presence of bullet holes to see if a muzzle to target distance would be possible.
And when you examined that sweatshirt, did you take photographs of it?
Yes, sir, I did.
I want to put up here on the screen what's been marked as State's Exhibit. Before I do this, is this okay? State's Exhibit 13A. Let me get this focused right. Do you recognize that photograph?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay, can you tell me, that's the photograph of the jacket or the sweatshirt that you described as contained in State's Exhibit 10?
Yes, sir, that is the front portion of the sweatshirt or the hooded jacket.
Okay. And there are numbers on there, are there not?
Yes, sir, there are.
Okay. Now I'm going to try and zoom this in a little bit to see, can you see those numbers? It's kind of hard with that.
I apologize, the screen is going greener as we are sitting here, so.
And I think you put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 circles.
Yes.
And what do those circles represent?
Those circles represent damaged areas that were noted on the front of the jacket.
Okay, based upon your training, your education, and your experience, are those areas consistent with the passage of a bullet?
Yes, sir, they could be, however, I cannot conclusively say that.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 13B. Do you recognize that photograph?
Yes, sir, I do.
And can you tell me what that is a photograph of?
This corresponds to the back portion of the jacket And I believe there's another area of damage over here on the end of the sleeve.
And again, those circled areas indicate defects in the jacket.
Yes, those represent damaged areas of the jacket.
Did you also have an occasion, as you previously discussed, to examine this jacket microscopically for gunshot residue?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell these folks what you found?
I found gunpowder particles on the front and on the back of the jacket.
Did you then have an occasion, sir, to take State's Exhibit 14 and examine or determine distances at which gunpowder would be deposited?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And you followed that procedure that you previously outlined?
Yes, I took the submitted firearm and the different brands of ammunition. I then test fired it at known distances to examine how far it will leave a reproducible pattern.
And with respect to your initial examination, which type of bullet did you use?
Initially, I used the Hornady brand ammunition with the submitted Glock pistol.
I'll show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 11A. Do you recognize this envelope?
Yes, sir, I do.
Can you tell me what's contained in that envelope?
This particular envelope contains distance samples that I took. They're white squares of cloth material that I test fired into to look at the collection of gunpowder that was deposited onto them using the submitted firearm ammunition at various known distances.
And you're looking for what?
When I look at the particular patterns, I look for the collection of gunpowder. I look at the size and relative density. As the distance increases, the pattern will typically get larger as the gunpowder moves away from the end of the barrel. As the pattern becomes larger, it becomes less dense.
At a later date, were you supplied with some star-lining pen stamped cartridges?
Yes, sir, I was.
And again, did you perform those distance determinations?
Yes, I performed the same sequence of events with the Starline ammunition as well.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 11B. Do you recognize that?
State's Exhibit 11B corresponds to the test-fired white cloth material that I test-fired into with the Starline ammunition and the submitted pistol.
With respect to State's, let me try and ask it this way. With respect to the Hornady ammunition, when fired out of State's Exhibit 14, what was the maximum distance that you could produce a reproducible pattern?
I found using the Hornady brand of ammunition, it would leave a reproducible pattern out to approximately 30 inches.
So with respect to the Hornady, you could tell if a garment was within, or a target was within 30 inches of the muzzle at the time of fire.
It was found to leave reproducible patterns to a distance of 30 inches. Should I have a pattern present that I can compare it to, I can compare those patterns to the pattern present on the evidence to give an approximate distance the barrel of the firearm was away from the garment.
And with respect to the Starline ammunition, what were the results of your examination?
The Starline ammunition was found to leave reproducible gunpowder patterns to approximately 24 inches.
You indicated on State's Exhibit 13A and B, the photographs that I showed you, that you found gunpowder.
Yes, I found gunpowder particles present on the front and back of the jacket. However, I did not find a defined pattern of gunpowder particles in which I could determine an approximate distance.
Mr. White, I've shown you a bunch of exhibits today. You testified how you tested them. What do you do with them when you're done testing?
Following my examination, the items are sealed and returned to a secure storage location until such time as they can be returned to the submitting agency.
And that sealed storage location is the same one you talked about earlier that nobody has access to except you folks?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Those exhibits, as you looked at them today, do they appear to be in the same or substantially the same condition as when you tested them?
Yes, sir, they were.
And States Exhibits 13A and 13B, the photographs that I showed you, are they fair and accurate depictions of what's contained in the bag marked States Exhibit 10?
Yes, sir, it is.
Could I have one moment, Your Honor?
You may.
One other question. You've stated a lot of opinions here based upon your testing and your training and your education and your experience. Are all those opinions to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
Yes, sir, they are.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Ms. Mills? Thank you.
I'm not sure I understand this.
Good afternoon, Mr. White. My name is Laura Mills, and I represent Colleen McKernan.
Good afternoon.
Now, did I understand this correctly, Mr. White, that you had two different testings, that you tested on one occasion, which I believe was in March of 2015, and then you tested again in April of 2015. Is that right?
To what specific testing are you referring?
Well, I think your first testing was on the critical defense only, the Hormady, correct?
Yes, ma'am. The two different tests referred to the test that I took at various distances with the supplied ammunition. Initially, I only used the Hornady because I did not have enough cartridges of the Starline present to perform any testing. Later, additional Starline cartridges were submitted for testing.
Well, and I appreciate that, Mr. White. My question is really on that first testing, the reason that you didn't have enough Starline is because there were only two, correct, that were submitted to you?
There were only two, yes, that is correct. There were only two remaining Starline cartridges present.
Correct. So you only tested the Hormady critical defense when you were looking to see what patterns you could see, correct?
Initially, yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then for some particular reason, you did a second testing then in April of 2015, correct?
The additional testing was per request by the agency.
Okay, and that was my question. Who requested you to do the testing?
Yes.
And that was the agency.
Yes, ma'am, that's
And
correct.
you said you were supplied Starline ammunition, correct?
Yes, there were supplied cartridges to me as well as the submitted Glock pistol for test firing.
And I understand that, Mr. White. Who supplied the Starline ammunition?
It was supplied through the submitting agency.
Okay, do you know whether or not that Starline ammunition was actually recovered at 1753 Oak Trail?
I have no firsthand knowledge of where the cartridges originated.
Okay. And Mr. White, do I understand that you did not perform any ejection pattern studies in this case, correct?
No, that's an examination not performed by our facility.
Okay, and also you have, is it true that there are so many variables that you cannot scientifically conclude where fired cartridge cases go?
Specifically, no.
Okay, and describe for me some of those variables, if you would, please.
Some of the variables, when I say generally speaking, the cartridge cases will be ejected to the right-hand side of the cartridge, or of the firearm, assuming the firearm is held in a vertical condition. Based on the orientation of the firearm, it can change the ejection. If it were held at a right-hand angle horizontally, the cartridge cases would be ejected more upward. Based also the surface the cartridge cases would come into contact with, should it be a smooth surface or it could be a rough surface, could affect how far the cartridge cases could bounce or roll. There's various conditions or variables that could be taken into account for, all of which are not performed by our agency.
Right. So therefore, you would not have any opinion in this particular case, correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Thank you. And Mr. White, you don't have any type of legal opinion as to what occurred at 1753 Oak Trail on December 31st, 2014, correct?
No, ma'am, I do not.
And obviously, the testing that you did perform on the two different dates gave you an indication on when you would see gunshot residue, correct? Specifics, I'm sorry, general distances in which you would see gunshot residue, correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay, but as you sit here today, you have no specific opinion as to the actual distance that you found on the white jacket, correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
If I can just have a moment, Your Honor.
You may.
Thank you, I have no further questions.
Can you redirect?
No, Your Honor.
You may step down, Mr. White. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Date, you may call your next witness.
Dr. Miller.
Counsel, just so you know, I do intend to take a break at some point this afternoon, so I don't know if it'll be in between this or not, just giving you the heads up on that. I don't think it's been long enough to take a break yet, but we will be. I'm not going to make you sit all afternoon.
Maybe a brief moment, Your Honor. It's my understanding Dr. Miller just went down to
Oh,
I guess I'm looking for him at this break.
okay. Well, maybe it is time to take our break then. And maybe that makes a little more sense. I know it's only been an hour, but we will go ahead then and take our afternoon recess. Do not discuss the case among yourselves or with anyone else. Do not let anybody talk about it in your presence. Do not form or express an opinion on the case until it is finally submitted to you. Why don't you just take between 10 and 15 minutes. I'll have Jeff down there ready to get you right at 10 after 3, and we will come back up and fill the balance of the afternoon. We are in recess.